Hey, do you have 15 minutes to talk about your mental health and building healthier relationships? Well, I'm glad you do, because that is about how long this podcast is. Welcome to Healthy Illness Podcast. I am your host, Calie Marie, and this week we are talking about triggers, activations, and PTSD. Does someone have to go to war in order to have a PTSD diagnosis? As you know, I am a peer who has um, lived my life, right, with an understanding of my own mental health conditions and a drive and determination to better understand myself, to better understand mental health as a spectrum and way of living similar to physical health. And I use my background, my education, and my experiences to help you and myself build healthier relationships while living with mental health conditions. I want to, before we dive deep into this topic, just remind you to head over to the Front Seat Life website, frontseatlife.com, sign up for updates so that you get all information regarding our monthly mindfulness event, Mindful AF. We spend 1 hour on the first Monday of every month, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, in a space that allows us to just be. I lead you through some mental health and some delete that part. I lead you through some mindfulness practices that you can use immediately following your Mindful AF session. And it's a great community of folks gathering to just be present, to just reflect, to just be healers and givers in a space where you don't have to heal and give others. You can heal and give to yourself. So frontseatlife.com, head over there. You can sign up for Mindful AF. You can also sign up for updates from Front Seat Life. That's me, Calie Marie, founder of Front Seat Life LLC and host of the Healthy Illness Podcast. And so this week we are talking about recovering from PTSD and whether or not you actually have to have gone to war in order to have a diagnosis of PTSD. And so in talking to my therapist a while back, and we were going over, the diagnoses that I've lived with, and what made sense and what didn't make sense. Her conclusion was that I did not have borderline personality disorder. That was not a condition that I was living with. Depression was a diagnosis. Generalized anxiety was a diagnosis. Major depression was a diagnosis. Generalized anxiety was the diagnosis. And she says complex PTSD. And so I know that one does not have to go to war, but often when we hear PTSD, we hear it in conversations around veterans and military personnel returning back from service having PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so what we are beginning to hear, what I'm beginning to hear, and what friends and folks in the mental health spaces, like community people, not the professionals, because I'm not one. I'm just a peer out here sharing my life with you. But what is happening in the community space around mental health is more folks being diagnosed with PTSD. And so I thought it made sense because, 2 episodes ago, we talked about activations, and I used the T word trigger and corrected that to activations, because there is a difference between how you live in your day-to-day life and how someone may activate a sensitive space within you, and actually being triggered with respect to a mental health disorder or mental illness. Now, you have to be diagnosed by a diagnosing professional in order to receive a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder or major depression, of PTSD or complex PTSD, bipolar disorder, any of the um, diagnoses in the DSM-5, that's the diagnostic manual that mental health professionals use. in order to diagnose people. So, in all fairness, this is coming off of 4th of July and a lot of social media posts around people not doing well around fireworks, not just veterans and military personnel, but people that have not been exposed to war, not been exposed to in quote unquote war, because what is war? What does the brain view as war? What does the brain view as traumatic? That experience is going to be different for different people. While we have buckets of understanding and buckets of things that make sense um, to the average Joe, Jane, Jolanda, yeah, what we do know is you don't have to go to war in order to have PTSD or something like complex PTSD. Childhood trauma, emotional abuse, medical trauma, being in toxic or abusive interpersonal relationships, living through interpersonal violence, workplace trauma, hypervigilance associated with life. And I'm going to go a little bit into what the diagnostic manual says, just so you have a better understanding of what that life is like. But in talking about, activations and separating activations from triggers so that we could better understand and give proper weight to uh, actual triggers versus activations, in the space and the immediate psychological response to people that have been traumatized and they're actual triggers, activations are for them triggers and trigger a psychiatric or psychological reaction outside of that made me mad, or I want to cuss somebody out, but I'm going to take a breath and not cuss nobody out, right? Like that is totally different than experiencing something and going immediately into a panic attack or having an anxiety attack, or some other type of physical response to a situation. And so I just want to elevate that so that as you're listening and, thinking about what can activate someone versus what can trigger someone. So again, being specific and using those two words, you don't have to, not everybody's not going to react the same way. And what one person experiences, and it may develop an activation or a soft spot, it may develop as a trigger to a more intense reaction, may do absolutely nothing for another person. And so there's no pointing fingers, there's no placing blame, there's no really trying to dig deeper at the finger pointing, outside of understanding that it exists and it happens and everyone responds differently. What we find in this space of healing, going back to 4th of July a few weeks ago, and people in my neighborhood are still, shooting off fireworks. Why? Like, let it go for me personally. Um, We also, in my community and many communities, have people from other places that are refugees, immigrants that have come from places where they have left because of war. And so that is also very real. These are civilians, everyday people who were living in their countries and in their communities. War broke out for reasons beyond their day-to-day living, and they are here living with us in the States. And so we have all of these buckets of people who, including the list of right how trauma um, can have the same impact as someone who has lived through a war, either as a military professional or as a civilian, and living with this diagnosis. And so, in speaking from this, peer perspective of what is war, you know, people living in communities where there is gun violence, and so you may hear gunshots or sirens going off, yelling and fighting, in just any house anywhere in America. Um, those are also the types of things that may um, produce activations or produce things that soft spots that can be activated, and traumatizations that can be triggers. And so, in this space of understanding the difference between being diagnosed and what it means to be, be diagnosed as post traumatic stress disorder, and really trying to just better understand yourself and work through some activation spaces that may not be on the scale of a trigger. There are a couple things that the um, mental health professionals, medical professionals will use to help diagnose you. One is exposure. So have you been directly exposed to an event? Have you been not the person the event happened to, but you witnessed um, the event as it happened to other people? Learning about traumatic events that happened to a close family member or friend, um, the death of a family member or friend due to violent or traumatic methods, whether accidental or intentional. And then experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to the details of traumatic events. So you could be traumatized by being a first responder, collecting human remains, or police officers were repeatedly being exposed to instances of child abuse, right? Like they are there to help, but in that helping, they're doing their jobs and they're witnessing and being exposed repeatedly to something that, perhaps one or two times it would not and was not traumatic, 15 times may not have been traumatic, but perhaps over the lifetime of their career, right? Or, in the span of a few months or a few years, depending upon the type of experiences that professional or first responder is having. The other thing that you have to have, it has to be, um, it has to be intrusive. Like, so the experience in the time after the event, you have to have intrusive reactions. And so disassociation, prolonged psychological distress, um, something that I thought would be great to be able to just touch on so that you understand the difference between the two. And so, again, check out the episode 2 episodes ago, where I talked about activations. I do use the word trigger, but I do mean activations in that space, and the difference between actual triggers and the visceral response that a person can have to um, life situations and traumatic events. And so if you're living in this space, my hope for you is that you're able to find some peace, that you're able to use some of the tools that are out there. A lot of folks that live with PTSD tend to stay busy so that their minds are not focused on the traumatic events. And they cope in many different ways. And so, again, everyone that stays busy is not staying busy because they are avoiding, you know, uh, triggers, right? But people that have PTSD often stay busy so that their mind is not focusing on the traumatic event. And so, again, my encouragement, if you are wondering if you fit into this space, is to seek assistance and find out, work with a medical professional who does diagnosing and is comfortable doing diagnosing of psychiatric issues and disorders for adults. Then a good place to start is your primary care physician, and they can make recommendations to mental health professionals. You can also go to online resources and check ratings of people. You can tap into social media. Be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful in using social media as a bellwether, as your tester for whether, excuse me, for whether or not someone has the credentials to be a mental health professional. So, for example, in the US, we can't use words, especially in New York State, we can't use words like therapist, um, anything that would lead someone to believe you are licensed by New York State to be able to provide mental health services, whereas other places don't have those same, um, not all places have those same rules around words that you can use to describe yourself. And so someone may be calling them a therapist, themselves a therapist. They may be calling themselves, Dr. So and so, but they're, doctorate in horticulture, but they still have that PhD, and now they're trying to diagnose you with mental health, you know. So be careful when going online and consulting social media, that, people actually have the credentials that they need in order to be able to best serve you. Okay. Um, More to come on life in general. I have been taking my antidepressants for almost a month now, and we'll give you an update on that space as well as my next steps in regaining my mental health. Um, Similar to someone that is, physically healthy and exercises all day. Um, I am mentally healthy, even though I have diagnoses. I'm generally healthy, and needed to take um, antidepressants because I could see the signs and the symptoms. I could see down the road what was going to happen if I did not put the brakes on this thing and implement another tool in my toolbox. So more to come on that. Um, big big congratulations to Calie, who is going back to Cali, graduated from high school and is going to San Diego State University. And so want to send you all of the hugs and well wishes and high fives that your heart can possibly hold as you embark on this new journey in life. And so as you go on to make new friends and keep some of the old friends and um, create who you are and dive deeper into the incredible human being that you are. I wish for you the greatest happiness. So big shout out everyone to Calie. Show her some love in her next phase of life, heading to uh, college on the other side of the country. So with that, until next time, I encourage you to be the light. Yeah, I encourage you to be the light. Love you. Bye.